cameras or just go? Poetry is the impatience of human existence, the times at which the divine light of prophecy has been shed upon it. These are the words of an Iranian modern poet, Mehdi Akhavan Sales. Hello everyone. I should tell you about this man, and perhaps before I do, I should tell you about myself. My name is Saman, and I am a student here, and I have a number of interests, but my main interest is applying the scientific thinking into literature, into poetry, into seeing how we can understand humanity, and this is what my thesis is, hopefully going to be within the next year. Aspects of historical consciousness through the fabric of Akhavan Sales' poetry. Okay, so this is the outline that I will be using for this presentation to make things very clear, and once we good with that. So why this research topic and not another topic? Well, first reason is that there isn't much literature in English about Mehdi Akhavan Sales, and because of the fact that he is a poet that goes beyond the boundaries of Iran, beyond the boundaries of literature and of humanity, and that is what's so important about this research, to bring that awareness. Another reason that this research is important is that we need to think about linguistics and how it is possible to translate from one language into another. And would we be able to remain and have the essence of the poetry, or would we not be able to do that? So these are the things that I'm interested in, that's why I'm doing this research. Now, let us get directly into the research question. So my thesis has two research questions I'd like to address. The first is the idea of time and presence in the poetry of Akhavan Sales, as you can see over there, and in the form of historical consciousness. So what exactly is historical consciousness? How are we able to describe historical consciousness? That's something that I'll be addressing to you very shortly. And the second part, which is still in its premature stage, is in what form does historical consciousness assume itself? How is it manifested? Is it a linear progression? Is it an evolutionary one? How exactly are we able to understand what this means, not just to the poetry itself, but the context of the general history of Iran? Okay, so let's talk about poetry. So what is Persian poetry? So this is a tradition of things that we've seen about hundreds of years ago, where rhythm and rhyme are the primary sources of how literature is governed. I'll give you two examples. So first of all, Farsi goes from right to left instead of going left to right. So we have these textual forms. This is, for example, an example of a Masnavi. I'm going to write it for you here. Hopefully my handwriting is not as bad as I think it is. So this is an idea of the meter being conserved within the ending of the words, right? Then we have another one called the Ghazal. This is another form where instead of using BBs and then I guess CC, we're going to take this part at the end of the poem and we're going to apply to everything else. It's going to be AA, BA, CA. Now, why do I mention this? Because Persian poetry used to have a structure, but modern poetry does not have that. And this is a movement that came with a very noted scholar, Nimai, who brought in the idea of Nimai poetry. And that is something that is so important because you're taking away the structure, you're taking away how the rhythm works. And you do this for one main reason. You want to have the absence of the structure reflect the society. You want to be able to some extent, create an experiment where you can express suffering, you can express oppression, you want to be innovative. And to be innovative, this is what Persian literature from Nimai went on to this poet that I will be talking about, Mehdi Akhavan Sales. Now, Akhavan Sales, as you can read the facts, I will not elaborate on these, I do recommend you read that though, was a very particularly important poet. First, because he was committed to literature, he was committed to the society, he was committed to the people. And we see this commitment through his interviews, where he saw the mission of the poet as a prophet, not in a very religious sense, not a sanctimonious sense where we're looking at, certain messages, certain values and ideals being communicated, but as a reflection of society, a reflection of how people think. That was very important. And then, again, Akhavan is an experimentalist. He says that he lives because he's a poet. So he sees his life entirely as the very fact that he's able to do this, and he really cherishes that, and we can see within his poetry, and we will come back to one of his poetry. Another part of Akhavan Sales' works that is very outstanding is the idea of symbolism. So he brings out these Zoroastrian contexts that was one of the primary religions of ancient Persia, this idea of henotheism, this idea of being one divine God and being other ones, and symbols of other poets. For example, if you've heard of the Book of the Kings, the Shahnamah Ferdowsi, Akhavan brings direct allusions to these things. And he's able to communicate his ideas through a different framework. So he's able to go back and recreate history, and that is so profound, that is so interesting for me, and that is what I want to tell you about. Now, I'm sure you've read the facts. Now let's continue on with the next part. This is a comparative literature approach I mentioned earlier, that I want to apply philosophy, I want to apply philosophical themes and ideas into what we can see within the poetry. And I particularly want to bring up Hegel, Friedrich Hegel, one of the most important German idealists. And I have to tell you what German idealism is, so I will do that right now. So it's, this is why you should prefer and not have papers. Anyway, so it's a shared and deep responsibility to idealism. What is idealism? Is that the way objects appear to us, the way that we perceive subjects. It's our sensory input, it's our way that we think and of things in themselves. That's something Immanuel Kant brings up in his critique of pure reason, and German idealism is a response to that. Now, a good question to ask is, why Hegel? Why not other noted philosophers? And the reason is that Hegel is known today as a historicist, as someone who's able to first see humanity had a history, there's an organic base towards society, and that human beliefs are derived from historical necessities. And it is through this realm that Hegel was able to go to Berlin, establish himself a very rooted scholar in the study of historicism, and to show that history conforms to organic laws, that history is able to raise itself through Geist, spirit. That's what the word in German is, by the way, in case that wasn't clear. And it is the progression of history, the way that things develop within themselves, that is so important to Hegel. And given that I'm a scientist by training, I want to have a diagram, so that's what I try to do over here. And we can see over here, this is how Hegel saw human values and the spirit developing. You see, from a historical sense, it leads to philosophy of history, but it starts through nature, it starts through organic forms, organic mediums. And it's able to translate itself into all these different steps and procedures. They're very complicated and very German, of course. So these are the state of progression that Hegel takes, but it really comes down and boils down to history, and the idea of history being able to reflect, being able to recreate human experience, the idea of history raising a self-awareness of reason itself, and that is what Hegel is all about. Okay? So now that we've defined historical consciousness, let's go back to a comparative approach between Akhavan Sales and between Hegel. Well, these are two people that lived in completely different periods of time, yet there is something so appealing about them, that they both have this space-time reference. This idea that we are able to not just see the past and the present and the future, but we're able to raise consciousness of these experiences. We're able to reflect upon them, we're going to create our own experience. So that is why I want to bring up a poem of his, and to talk about that with you. And the reason I'm doing this is we can see the struggles of modernity. We can see the fact that there's fears and hopes within humanity. We can see the fact that there is this organic element I referenced earlier. And we can see that through a poet that has no correlation with Hegel, doesn't even speak the language, but we can still see a context of it. And I want you to take this time to read this poem. And I'm going to explain why I chose this poem. So this is a poem by the name of Zemestan. You can see the Persian text on the right, you can right to left, and the English is left to right. This is written in response to the coup d'etat of 1953. So just a historical context. This is when the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, was abdicated from his power, and the Shah of Iran was brought back through the interventions by United States and United Kingdom and other countries. And if you see this poetry very clearly, and I want to give you this time to linger about this and to think about this, is that this is a clear political statement. We can see words like the very beginning of this, they're not going to answer your greetings. Who are they? Why is that? You're put into this sense that as you read these words, that the narrator itself is able to recreate very, very vivid experiences of how he is in a cold and brutal, distant winter, and how he's able to try to interact with other people, but the fact that they don't have any interest in that interaction, that they don't want to be talking. And that's clear because of the fact that, there was corruption back then. There was this fear of, going to imprisonment. And the fact that Akhavan himself in his early times was in prison. And this is a reflection of, in my interpretation at least, reflection of the author's history of the past. Now, notice certain words that are very, very important. The breath which becomes out of his lungs becomes a dark cloud. Again, this sense of symbolism, this sense that he goes beyond the definition of words, he goes beyond these ideas to explain and to express what history not ought to be, but history what history can be. And that reason itself, that propagation of it, and again, there's another excerpt of it that I would like to read and end this discussion with. I am neither white nor black. I am colorless. Come and open the door. See how cheerless I am. Oh, my dear host, your nighty guest is so shivering outside. There is no hail outside, no death. If you hear any sound, it is the sound of a cold in teeth. I have come tonight to pay up my loan. I have come tonight to leave my debt beside my mom. Again, this idea of a certain person living in a certain environment, expressing themselves through the idea of time, through the idea of presence of time, and through that medium. Now, before I end, I want to share with you the future discussion of the research very quickly. I'm just going to elaborate the very, very first point. So I want to see how historical consciousness later develops in collective memory, and how we're able to use that as a reference, as lens, to describe Iran's history, or at least give an interpretation of it. Because it is in that merit that this research will be possible. And speaking of the merit of the research, we go to the most important part. Actually, no. This is the most important for me. These are the sources that have been used in this discussion, and the very captivating summer that was prolonged throughout the summer. Now, the acknowledgement section, I would like to thank my Persian literature professor, who is a great man. I admire him as his role model, Professor Wali Ahmadi, who's here present with us, and that is the greatest honor for me to have him here. I would like to thank the St. Hazel Foundation for the very fact they were so generous in offering this great opportunity for me to be looking to literature. I want to thank Sean, I want to thank Melissa, I want to thank Justin Lopez for their contribution, for their help. I want to thank my parents, even though they're not here. Hi Mom, hi Dad. And I want to thank my beautiful girl from Miracle, who's actually here and actually came all the way from Canada to be here. So this is a very meaningful moment of my life, and I'm really glad to share it with you, so thank you so much for listening.